In this video, I'd like to look at some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript related to checkbox input on a web page. The code for this can be found at the URL seen here. I'm going to go through a number of versions of this. This will be the first version, sort of most straightforward, and then we'll sort of make it a little more sophisticated on the JavaScript side as we go. Okay, so here is what the page looks like. It gives a list of movies, and it's asking the user which ones they've seen. Actually doesn't explicitly say that, but that's the intent here. And then there's down here a single checkbox. These are going to be treated as a group of related checkboxes, and then this is a single checkbox, and we want to sort of see the difference between dealing with the group and dealing with the individual one. So we sort of sit here and we say which movies have the user seen. So we have some styling different from when a checkbox is checked, or at least of the label that's next to the checkbox. And then I can select the movies, and it says you must agree to the conditions. So that's that different. And then I'll say I agree. And that also has the same styling. So if we wanted to, we could get the styling of that checkbox to be different than the others by working, say, styling its ID. I select the movies, and here's a list of movies in my alert. And then down here, it's turned them into, that looks like an ordered list down here. And let's see, did I have anything? Yes, I had some things down here in the console. So there's also some console activity. If I change by checking, then it sort of clears out the answer. And same thing as if so there I check something that wasn't previously checked. Now I will uncheck something, and it does it either way. Okay, it clears out the answers. All right, so let's have a look at this. Here is the web page, the HTML. And up here in the head, we have a link to a style sheet, which I'll look at sort of briefly. So the body has a color, background color, and a color. The div has some margin. The input is bold and has some padding. The input of the button type. So the checkboxes are inputs of the check type, and the button is an input of the button type. There's also a button tag, so you can make buttons separate by using the button tag, but I'm using the input of the button type. And so here in the style, this is just the styling of inputs of the button type. And here is the inputs of the button type with a hover. So if I'm over the button, it's styled differently than if I'm not over it. So that's the effect of this :hover. I have a label next to the checkboxes. I have a label displaying them as inline block, which allows me to assign them a width. And inline means that they can be on the same line with something else. So this label can be on the same line as the checkbox, and then giving it, that's the inline part, and then the block part means I can assign it a width. So I can give these all the same width. So it's not, otherwise the label would be just enough room to sort of have the size of the movie. So these wouldn't all be the same length, or the same, I should say width. So that is what the label did. And down here, we are styling the inputs of the type checkbox that happen to be checked. And we're actually styling the label that's next to them. So this plus is called an adjacency selector. So it's the thing that's next to them. So this would be known as they are siblings, and this would be the next sibling. And so that's some styling of that. So and we were saying that when the checkboxes are checked, the label next to them is styled differently than the other labels. Okay, so that is our style. Let's go over to the checkboxes. The checkboxes work a lot like the radio buttons, and the big difference being with a set of radio buttons. Radio buttons are set up that you can choose at most one, and that is all done sort of for you. Checkboxes have a lot of similar features, except as we saw, that you can choose more than one thing with a checkbox. So that's the main distinction. So here's an input. There's an ID that is going to be used in conjunction with the label. So the input has an ID and the checkbox and the label has a 4. And if those match, it's case sensitive, then the label and the checkbox work as a team, and the user can click on either the checkbox or the label, and that has the same effect. The input has a name, and the name has a, if we're doing something like a server-side language, then the name plays a bigger role. Of the name is how you refer to things when you are coding a web page to interact with the server. But here, as just sort of pure JavaScript, sort of on what we call the client side, the purpose of name is to group things. And I've given it an odd name here of check movie open close square bracket. And that is me sort of picking a weird name based on this compromise, even though what I'm doing here is JavaScript at client side. If this were to be used with PHP or a server language, then we would not want to know that what we are passing with these elements was an array. So that's why the strange name of the square brackets for some server-side language like PHP to be able to pass an array to sort of to announce that this is passing an array. So for us, it's just a grouping thing. We'll be able to access the group of checkboxes based on their name, but it can play another role. So, and the weird name is based on that other role. Okay. The type attribute here is checkbox. So we saw that that's what made it that little square thing that could be checked. The value is what gets passed behind the scenes. Then we have an onclick attribute that connects the action of the button, in this case, the click action of the button, to a JavaScript function that we must define below. And we're passing it to keyword this, and that's going to help us if we want to, in that function, do anything specifically related to the element that sent it there. Then that's the end of input. Then we have the label. We already talked about the 4 matching the ID of the input. Then label has an open and a close, and then this is what the user sees. So right now I have my values, and what's in the label, I have them agreeing, but that doesn't have to be. I could use some sort of code here, you know, Godfather 1, GF1 or something like that. But I'm just using the title of the movie as the value, but also is what the user sees in between the open and close label. And then this is just the same, but different movies. Down to here. So here is Titanic. That was the last movie in the list. And then here is the conditions. I gave it a name and an ID. When that's a convention, but when you have not a checkbox that's working in a group, but a checkbox that is sort of an individual one, then it's a convention anyway to give it the same name as ID. And the ID is when you're working in JavaScript, and the name is when you're working with server-side languages. But if you've given them the same name and ID, then then you sort of don't have to think about, am I doing client-side stuff or server-side stuff, because it's the same. We don't have that option with the group, because we want to use the name for the grouping purpose, and therefore then the names and the IDs are different, because we want the grouping action of the name attribute. Okay, and this goes to a this is going to handle check click. So all of them are going to handle checkbox click, even the checkbox. I could assign this one a different function, but what I'm doing here in this function is just sort of a clearing action. So if they change their mind, I'm going to clear it. Okay, so that is the HTML, and then, well, not quite, because there's still a button. An input of the button type, button click, value select movies, that's what you see on the button, and a method if you click, a handle button method, and then here's a div for displaying the sort of list of movies. Okay, and there's a little bit of individual style for this div here. So there was an external style sheet, and then there was some styling right here, sort of inline styling right here in this div. Okay, so now we're to the script. And we see that script is at the bottom of the page. If I collapse the script, you can see that I am enabling the button. This is not in a function, so this happens as soon as we reach the script. So browser forms the page and then begins the script. And if the button happened to be disabled for any reason, we set that property to false, enabling the button. We are looping through the elements. So this is why the name is a grouping, and on client side, a scripting, the name property tends to group things. So here we're grabbing the elements with the name, checkbox, check movie, open, close square bracket. So that's just part of the name. And we're starting with a counter of I equals 0 or an index, and going up to but not including the length, and going up by ones. And we are setting the check properties of the checkbox to false. So if we're working with a browser that tends to remember the user's choices, even if they refresh the page, we are sort of overruling that and unchecking all the checkboxes here. Here is our button click function. Here we're asking about that conditions checkbox. So we're working with that one by ID because it's a sort of a single one. You could work with it by name, but then even though there's only one, it would be an array with one item, and that would make it more complicated. So because it's a single working on its own checkbox, I've gone back to working with IDs. So I'm asking if it's checked, and this little exclamation point is the sort of not operator. So I'm asking if it's not checked. Some people will also say, like, instead of having the exclamation point here, some people will say sort of equal false or something. That's another way to do this. If the checkbox is not checked, if the conditions checkbox is not checked, we're just sort of yelling and getting out. What we're going to get is an array of movies. So now we're moving on, so that now we're assuming that the condition was allowed, and we're moving on to get the array of movies. And again, the answer, checkboxes allow you to choose a group of things. So our answer is an array. So here's our empty array. And this is the sort of old fashioned approach, and we're going to have different versions and do it in a fancier way. But here's an old fashioned approach of looping over the elements. So the same loop over the checkboxes that we saw before. We're asking if the ith checkbox is checked, then we are taking our array and we're pushing the value, which was the title of the movie, onto our array of movies, our user input. When we're done the loop, then we know the user's choice of movies. And if the length of that array is 0, that means we didn't choose any movies, and we're just saying you didn't choose any movies. Otherwise, we're alerting the movies they chose. So this is the array user input, and we can sort of join together the elements of an array. This is sort of the opposite of a split. Join is putting together, and so we're putting all the movie titles together with a comma and a space in between. That's what we saw in the alert. We're doing the same in the console log. And then here on the page in the div, we're saying we're referring to the number of movies chosen. I can sort of point that out, but this says you selected 5 movies, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This isn't a movie down here. This agreed to all conditions. So there were 5 movies. And that comes up sometimes. Sometimes you want to work on sometimes you need to know the length of the number of things chosen. So I threw that in. And here is this OL is an ordered list. And so here's the open ordered list and the close ordered list. So the things in between will be a list, an ordered list of items. Ordered means they're going to be numbered in this case. And I'm putting in I'm using my array, and here I'm joining it with a closed list item. It was sort of opened before we got started, and then there's a closed list item and an open list item. And then when we're done all of that, this is between every, so if there are 5 movies, there are going to be 4 of these between, sort of in between every movie, in between every 2 movies in the list, there's going to be this close li, open li, and then at the end, the final close li and the final close ol. So if there are 5 things, there will be 4 of these between them. And then here's the very opening li at the beginning, the very closing /li at the end. All right. And disabling the button. If here's my checkbox handler. So this was all the checkboxes, including the condition one, if you recall. If they check any checkbox, we're going to clear out the list of movies that here's div result was the list of movies. And we are going to re-enable the button click by setting the disable property to false. And we're console logging something out saying, remember that we send it this so we know which which checkbox was checked. And then we're going to show the value, which is the title of the movie, and then its check property, whether we're checking it so it'll be true or unchecking it, it'll be false. And that's just showing up in the console. So, okay, and there we are at the bottom of the file. So that's what I wanted to show you. Thanks very much for your